Hello, today I'm going to be talking about how our perceptions of the world and ourselves and things that happen around us can affect our happiness and what we can do to stop them from affecting our happiness. Yoga teaches us that our perceptions of things aren't real. We know about this because if you remember last year we had that frankly ridiculous debate going on the internet about the dress. And for a couple of weeks, the whole world seemed to be completely preoccupied with the dress and what colour a dress was. And it was really interesting to look at the way people were responding to this dress, because the people who saw it as, was it yellow and gold or gold? They were absolutely convinced that they were right, and the people who saw it as blue and black were also equally convinced that it was right, and clearly it was blue and black. um, but it was a really, I found the whole thing quite bizarre that we were so obsessed with this idea of this dress. I found it really interesting as a lesson in how we see things so differently. And when we grow up, we form a bank of experiences, of likes and dislikes. As from the minute we're born, we are accumulating information about how we see the world, not about how our parents see the world, about how our siblings see the world, or about how our friends see the world. Our information is entirely based on how we encounter the world, how we see it, how we smell it, how we taste it, how we hear it, and how we feel it. Our entire worldview is shaped by our senses and how we process those senses in our own unique way. I grew up with a brother who was just a little bit younger than me. We grew up together. We had many same experiences. We had the same parents. We lived in the same house. We went to the same things. We ate the same meals. We did an awful lot of the same things. We grew up with incredibly different worldviews. We grew up with incredibly different ideas of what was interesting, what music was good, what activities were fun to do. We grew up completely differently because we were different people and we had our own version of reality. I would imagine that our versions of our childhood would be very different as well. I'm sure that he wouldn't remember beating me up quite as many times as I remember him beating me up. He would probably remember that I beat him up a lot more, because that we remember things that obviously are more meaningful to us. So what we see as real, what we are absolutely convinced is real, isn't necessarily what is real to somebody else. And so that's really useful to bear that in mind when we are looking at our interactions with other people and our interactions with the world. That just because we think that something is a particular way doesn't mean that other people think that it's the particular way as well. This can be a very useful thing to bear in mind when we are looking at how we see our place in the world and how we see other people in terms of judgment and comparison. And judgment and comparison are two massive barriers to happiness, because when we're judging ourselves or comparing ourselves to others, we're either going to think we are better than them or we're worse than them. We're not as good as them, or that we want what they have, or we might pity somebody because we think that we've got a better life than them. However we come out of that judgment, it doesn't actually lead us to happiness. Superiority doesn't mean happiness. So when we judge people, we're judging from our perspective, using our memory banks, using our experience of the world, our perception of the world. We might look at somebody and feel pity for them, but actually they might be happier than us. They might have a better life than us in lots of ways. They might not have the things that we have, but they might be happier than us. We might look at somebody who seems to have a perfect life and be envious of them, but actually they would rather have many aspects of our lives. So judgment and comparison are really big barriers to happiness. And if we're looking at happiness, we need to be aware of when we are judging ourselves and judging others, and when we're comparing ourselves against others, and whether that's comparing them and thinking we're better or that we're worse. It's not helpful to our happiness, and it's not helpful to our place in the world, how we see our place in the world. I think that probably most of us are harsher critics and judges of ourselves than we are of anybody else. And this is the hardest one to get past, I think, really. I know from my own experiences, I can be absolutely savage in my criticism of myself. I'm not so bad now, but when I was unhappy, when I was depressed, when I was an alcoholic, I would say things to myself that I would not dream of saying to anybody else, that I would never have the guts to say to anybody else, that I would never even want to say to anybody else, because they were horrible, horrible things that I was thinking about myself. I very rarely had good judgment to pass on myself. I rarely allowed myself to feel good about anything I did, but I was savage in my criticism of the bad things that I did, or what I perceived were the bad things that I did. And that was just so debilitating. But we do this, and we don't even realize we're doing it half the time, but we have this self-talk. And for an awful lot of us, our self-talk is negative. And the really, the terrible thing about our self-talk is it's pretty much constant. It's there all the time. We're not even aware of it most of the time. You're going about your day and there's this monologue going on inside your head that's narrating your day. As you go through your day, it's kind of a constant narration of what's going on. And if we're not aware of it, we could allow the negative self-talk to take over. And it's a very powerful self-talk. How we talk to ourselves is incredibly powerful, and it affects how we see ourselves. I saw a meme yesterday on Facebook that said, be careful how you talk to yourself, because you're listening. So we talk about being careful about how we talk around children. We don't want to say nasty things around children, but we say terrible things inside our own heads to ourselves. If someone was to talk to me the way I used to talk to myself, I would be absolutely devastated. I would be horrified. I wouldn't want to spend any time in that person's company at all, because who wants to be around somebody that makes them feel bad? But yeah, I used to do that all the time to myself, and I now don't do it, because now I have learned to be aware of my thoughts. I've learned to notice when I'm doing that, when I'm slipping into that, because I still do. I'm not sitting here telling you I've got it all sussed and that I'm living this perfect life. I'm not. What I have is awareness of what is going on in my head an awful lot. So when I hear that voice starting to say, oh look, you really messed that up, you're so stupid, you're so rubbish, you're such an awful person, you're such a terrible mother, and all the other things that I might find my inner critic, my inner bitch telling me, I can stop that now. I've learned how to stop that, and I will acknowledge if I've made a mistake. Yeah, I've made a mistake. I can admit that. I screwed up. But that does not define me. I am not my mistakes. I am not a terrible person because I didn't write the blog post I planned to write. I am not a terrible person because I messed up that one thing. I'm a good person. I'm a completely normal person who makes mistakes. I'm human. We all make mistakes. And what I do in those things, in those moments, is I look for what can I learn from that mistake. Instead of berating myself for it, I look for what can I learn. How can I use this mistake to my advantage? And it really helps to shift my thinking around and to make me to help me to see that mistake not as a disaster, but as a learning tool, and then you can switch it and turn a mistake into a positive, because we can always learn from our mistakes. And if we can see things that go wrong as opportunities for learning, then we can embrace them and we can feel happy even in the face of things not going quite right. And when we make mistakes, or when things outside us happen and don't go right, we can learn from it. So try and bear in mind as you go through the rest of your day now, try and pay attention to what you're thinking, and try and just stop those negative thoughts. Try and stop those negative judgments and flip them around. Try and, if you're thinking, I really messed up, I got all that wrong, whatever it is that you're thinking, try and look for how can you turn that into a positive. How can you make that be something that you can learn from? And just see how it goes. And I would love to hear from you if you do manage to do that today, or if you have any observations that you make while you're living in this greater awareness, when you're trying to bring this awareness into your life. I would love to hear how it goes.